You keep replaying it, the moment, the choice, the thing you said or didn't say. Everyone else has moved on, but you're still there. Not because you're weak, because guilt has a way of convincing you that suffering is the same thing as paying your debt. It isn't. There's a specific kind of exhaustion that comes from carrying something no one else can see. You function, you work, you show up, but underneath there's this quiet noise, a voice that loops the same judgment. You should have known better. You're not who you thought you were. If they really knew, they wouldn't look at you the same. Guilt doesn't announce itself loudly. It just sits there, a weight that doesn't crush you, but never lets you stand straight. You've tried to think your way out of it. You've apologized. You've made amends. You've promised to be better. And still, when you're alone with your thoughts, it returns. The same scene, the same regret, like your mind refuses to let it be over. This isn't weakness. This is your conscience doing what it was designed to do. The problem is that it doesn't know when to stop. What the monks understood, in Zen monasteries, there's a practice called kinhin, walking meditation. After hours of seated stillness, the monks stand and walk in a slow, deliberate circle. One step, one breath, then another. The movement isn't about going anywhere. It's about acknowledging that sitting in one position too long creates pain. Even stillness, when held too rigidly, becomes a form of suffering. Guilt operates the same way. It begins as a signal, your conscience saying, "This matters, pay attention." But if you never move from that position, the signal becomes the suffering. You're no longer learning from what happened, you're just punishing yourself for it. The monks don't resist the discomfort. They don't pretend it isn't there. They acknowledge it, then they move, not away from it, through it. The difference between guilt and shame. In Stoic philosophy, there's a clear distinction between what you control and what you don't. You cannot change the past. That fact is absolute. But your relationship to the past is entirely within your control. Guilt says, "I did something wrong." Shame says, "I am something wrong." One is a compass, the other is a prison. Marcus Aurelius wrote that the mind becomes dyed by the color of its thoughts. If you spend every day replaying your mistake, you're not correcting it, you're reinforcing it. You're teaching your mind that this one moment defines you more than everything else you've done. And that's simply not true. You've made 1,000 choices. This was one of them. You're letting that one moment eclipse everything else because guilt tricks you into thinking that's what integrity looks like. But integrity isn't suffering, it's clarity.
Your brain doesn't process guilt the way you think it does. When you do something that violates your values, your mind opens a ledger. On one side, the harm caused. On the other, the penance required. The problem is that your mind doesn't know how to balance this ledger, so it keeps it open. Forever. You feel bad, and that feeling becomes the payment. Day after day, you deposit more suffering into the account, but the balance never reaches zero, because emotional pain isn't currency. Feeling terrible doesn't undo what happened. It doesn't repair the harm. It just convinces you that you're doing something about it. This is the trap. You think guilt is proof that you've changed. It isn't. Action is proof. Behavior is proof. Guilt is just a feeling that pretends to be useful. Miyamoto Musashi fought over 60 duels. He wrote that after each one, he would examine what happened without emotion, not to justify himself, not to punish himself, to understand. He asked, "What did I miss? Where was I slow? What pattern did I fall into that I shouldn't repeat?" Then he moved on. Not because the duel didn't matter, because he had already extracted everything useful from it. Replaying it endlessly wouldn't make him better, it would just make him slower in the next fight. You need to apply the same principle. Ask yourself, what did I learn from this? How am I different because of it? What will I do differently next time? Answer those questions honestly, once. Then stop asking them. Because after you've learned the lesson, guilt has no more purpose. It's just noise pretending to be wisdom. The apology you can't make. Sometimes the guilt persists because you never got to apologize. The person is gone, or they won't speak to you, or the moment has passed. You carry it because you believe that without their forgiveness, the account can never close. But that's giving someone else control over your peace, and peace is not something another person can give you. In Tibetan Buddhism, there's a practice where monks write their regrets on paper, then burn them. Not to erase what happened, but to acknowledge that holding on to it doesn't change it. The fire doesn't make the mistake disappear. It makes the attachment disappear. You can do this in your own way. Write what you would say if you could. Every word, every apology. Say it out loud to an empty room if you need to. Then decide that you've said it. Not to them, to yourself. Because at a certain point, the person you're really seeking forgiveness from is you.
Guilt that lingers too long stops being useful. It becomes a form of self-protection. As long as you're suffering, you don't have to risk being imperfect again. You stay small, you stay careful, you avoid situations where you might fail. But that's not growth, that's hiding. The Stoics understood that guilt unchecked becomes cowardice. Not moral cowardice, existential cowardice. You become afraid to live fully because you're terrified of making another mistake. So you live in a controlled, narrow way, never fully engaged, never fully present, always holding back. That's the real cost, not the mistake itself, but the years you spend punishing yourself instead of building something better. There's no formula, no countdown, but there's a question that helps. If someone else had done this exact thing, how long would you expect them to carry it? A week? A month? A year? Now ask yourself, have you exceeded that time? If yes, then the guilt is no longer serving its purpose. It's just a habit. The Zen monks say that attachment to guilt is still attachment. It's still the mind clinging to something because letting go feels like losing control. But letting go isn't forgetting. It's acknowledging that you've paid enough attention. The lesson has been learned, the behavior has changed, and now continuing to suffer serves no one. Not the person you hurt, not yourself, not the version of you trying to move forward. You don't need anyone's permission to forgive yourself, but you're waiting for it anyway. Waiting for some external sign that says, okay, you've suffered enough. That sign isn't coming, because no one else is tracking this, only you. So you have to give yourself permission, not in a loud ceremonial way, quietly. In a moment when you're alone with your thoughts, you simply say, I did something wrong. I understand why it was wrong. I've changed because of it. I'm letting this go now. You might have to say it more than once, that's fine, but at some point you stop waiting for permission from the past and you start living in the present. You'll know you've moved on when the memory stops hurting, not because you've forgotten, but because the story has changed. It's no longer, I'm the person who did that terrible thing. It's, I'm the person who learned from that moment. The event itself hasn't changed, but your relationship to it has. That's what forgiveness actually is. Not erasing, not justifying, just releasing the grip. You stop letting one moment define the entire arc of who you are. You allow it to be what it was, a moment, one choice in a lifetime of choices, and you move forward, not because you're running from it, but because you've already been there long enough. You don't need to feel guilty forever to prove you care. You just need to be different, and you already are. The weight you're carrying isn't the mistake, it's the refusal to believe you've learned from it. So put it down, not because it didn't matter, but because you've already carried it long enough.